Hello, and welcome to the second lecture, which I've entitled The Post-War World for the Freedmen. The first lecture that we had was really just about politics at the top level. Okay, so what are the things that freed people wanted, and to what extent did they get them? Well, one of the things that they wanted the most was to reunite their families. 1 in 4 African Americans were separated from their families by slave sales and by the war in any given 12-year period, which meant that very few African American families were able to see all of their members grow up together. In an effort to establish their families or reestablish their families, people would travel great distances, inquire about their relatives at former plantation homes, search for them in so-called contraband camps where African Americans who had run away to the north were found, ask at government agencies, ask at churches. Many wrote letters in search of relatives, and those who couldn't write asked other people to write letters for them. But most attempts to reunite families were unsuccessful. And sometimes when people did find their family members, there was additional heartbreak. People were separated from husbands or wives for years or even decades, and sometimes they had remarried. Sometimes reunions, even among those who had not remarried, were very difficult. There were custody battles, there were attempts to get child support. So sometimes even reuniting the family did not lead to a happy family. One of the ways that African Americans asserted their autonomy in this period was to legalize their marriages. Marriages that had been contracted in slavery times were not recognized in any way by the law. So freed people pursued court-recognized marriages to fulfill their obligations, or sometimes they needed to be legally married in order to collect pensions, to legitimate their children, this kind of thing. These marriages were solemnized by missionaries, by preachers, by public officials, and there were wedding celebrations to commemorate them. Courts held mass weddings that married up to 70 freed couples at a time. In 1866, in North Carolina, 17 counties registered 9,000 marriages, and 4 Virginia counties registered 3,000 marriages. So there was a wave of people legitimating their marriages. Another thing that African American freed people did to assert their autonomy in this period was to take new names as a symbol of their independent selfhood. During slavery times, slaves were assigned first names by their masters, who often used derogatory phrases to refer to them, and they had to take the last names of their slave owners. But once freed, they could change their names to something that didn't carry the humiliation of that former relationship. While freedom inspired hope in African American men and women, their families, which were flexible units comprised of parents and children and sometimes unrelated people, their families had to really work very hard and dynamically with limited resources in order to survive. Women in particular had greater input in household decisions than they had under slavery, and also because they were used to working, much more used to working than white women in families at this time, they were less likely to put up with crap that was handed out to them. Basically, they would not stick around in dysfunctional relationships. because they had been accustomed to providing for their family's needs. All right, so we had strong, flexible family units in which African American women really worked to provide for their families. Another thing that freed people wanted in the post-Civil War period was to form their own churches and establish their own independent communities. And the Black church was really one of the most successful institutions in the post-war South. Independent churches were established throughout the South. Black people wanted to create their own spiritual path. They rejected what they considered to be white Christianity, and they created their own traditions and were very successful at doing so. They represented a point of African American life that existed outside of white control. Men occupied the highest ranks in the Black church, but women were the majority of the members. And women had a very large role. They raised money for the church. They taught Sunday school. They ran women's auxiliaries. They welcomed visitors. They set up all kinds of social welfare programs. They also played an important role in foreign missionary societies. And they were considered, quote, church mothers, unquote. And this was derived from the role that they played as homemakers, as mothers, as wives. On the other hand, they were not usually allowed to become ministers or preachers. African American women also played an important role in the survival of some religious practices that derive from Africa or from the Caribbean. Conjure rituals, voodoo rituals, initiation rites were often officiated by African American women voodoo priestesses like Marie Laveau of New Orleans. But for the most part, the African American churches frowned on these folk rituals, seeing them as a relic of slavery. African American churches had economic enterprises like printing and selling religious pamphlets and Bibles and tracts. And the African American church also established hospitals, helped communities fight epidemics, also set up some schools. So the church was the center of economic life, of social life, and even of political life. Local, state, and national politics were discussed within the confines of the church. Ministers played many roles in the African American community, and this is something that we're going to see in this class right up through the civil rights movement and even to today. Ministers and preachers function as political leaders because they saw their role as public servants to their congregations and as a kind of liaison between their communities and white politicians. Many of them really believed that the cornerstone of politics was morality. All right, so the Black church, extremely important and one of the more successful aspects of the freed community in the post-Civil War period. Now, freed people wanted their own land, and this was really, as I suggested to you in the previous lecture, the downfall of Reconstruction. African American families associated land with independence, as did many Americans in the 19th century, and they really wanted the land that they worked on. And towards the end of the Civil War, William T. Sherman, who was a Union general, resettled more than 40,000 former slaves on land that had been confiscated from Confederates in Georgia and South Carolina. But later, Andrew Johnson promised to return these Confederate lands to their white owners, saying that, hey, it's not fair to take away people's property, and this despite the fact that these owners had taken up arms against their own country. So people found that they had the lands only for a short time. In 1866, Congress passed a Southern Homestead Act, and this made public land available to freedmen, but it really had very little impact, and after 10 years it was repealed. Well, without the money or credit to buy land, many African Americans found themselves forced into tenancy, which means renting, or into sharecropping, which I am going to discuss in another lecture. Tenancy contracts tied African American farmers to the land. They were renters. They were forced to work, often for the same people on whose plantations they had been enslaved. Sharecropping agreements, people worked the land for a portion of the crop that they produced, and as we're going to see in a subsequent lecture, all of their tools and all of their clothes and all of their food for the family for the year while they were growing the food had to be purchased on credit from the landowner. And so this created a very bad debt relationship. And again, I'm going to go much more into sharecropping in a subsequent lecture. Freed people wanted literacy. 90% of African American freed people were illiterate at the end of the Civil War. Why? Because it had been illegal to teach African Americans in the South to read and write. But many of them wanted to be literate. All ages of people wanted to go to school. And schools were quickly set up under the aegis of the Freedmen's Bureau and the American Missionary Association in the Reconstruction South. Lots of teachers and missionaries from the North, women especially, came down and started these schools. The schools were segregated and they were only open during the winter months, but even so, by 1880, the number of people who could not read or write, African American people, was down to 70% by 1880, and by 1910 that was down to 30%. So slowly over decades, the illiteracy rate was coming down. By 1868, more than half the teachers in African American schools in the South were African American themselves. Teaching for these people was a special calling, not just a job. Historically, African American colleges and universities emphasized teacher training, but they also had a very specific view of what their role was. So for example, something like Fisk University, Fisk was a university that catered more to the regular liberal arts curriculum. And Hampton Institute and Tuskegee Institute, on the other hand, believed that the most important thing for African Americans to learn was vocational skills, or what was called industrial education. So things like farming, manufacturing, domestic service, these were the sorts of things that were taught at Hampton and Tuskegee. Hampton's mission, quote, was to train selected Negro youth who should go out and teach and lead the people first by example, by getting land and homes, to teach respect for labor, and in this way to build up an industrial system for the sake of not only self-support and intelligent labor, but for the sake of character. We are going to see a split in the black community between those who believe in a classical liberal arts education represented by W.E.B. Du Bois, who I mentioned in the previous lecture, and on the other hand, somebody like a Booker T. Washington, another leader of the black community, who really felt as though African Americans had to learn manual trades with their hands, and only really in subsequent generations would people get a full liberal arts education. So two very different views on what the future of the black community was going to be. Here you see the Fisk Jubilee Singers. This was a singing group that was set up to deal with the fact that Fisk University had fallen on really bad financial times in the 1880s. So the Fisk Jubilee Singers toured all around the country. They played for the president, they played for all kinds of famous people, sang for them, and raised a lot of money for Fisk University by singing. Finally, another opportunity for African Americans in the 19th century, besides getting an education of some kind, or becoming sharecroppers or tenant farmers, to find better opportunities, they went outside the South, and they went in this time period to the West. So this is different from the so-called Great Migration, capital G, capital M, that I will be talking about in a subsequent lecture. The West provided African Americans with opportunities of several types. The U.S. colored troops found themselves fighting in wars against Native Americans that were designed to remove Native Americans from their land and put them onto reservations. Between 1866 and 1917, 25,000 African American men served in the 9th and 10th Cavalry Regiments, and they were called Buffalo Soldiers, a reference to their dark hair and their resemblance to a buffalo's mane, and also to their fierce fighting abilities. But Buffalo Soldiers faced a difficult life in the West. They didn't have an opportunity to get rotated out of combat. They were pretty much permanently in service. Some brought their wives and children to live with them. And the point of the government using them in the far West was, oh, okay, well, this is going to minimize racial tensions. But there were still racial tensions between African American soldiers, Native Americans, Hispanic people, and sometimes there was violence, as when a black soldier was lynched in Sturgis, Dakota Territory in 1885. Many African American soldiers served without the opportunity to become officers, so there was discrimination. Now, another opportunity for African American people was to migrate mostly to Kansas and other places in what was considered the West at this time. Migrants built all black towns, established self-government. So, for example, in 1877, African American settlers poured into Nicodemus, Kansas, from Lexington, Kentucky. By 1880, they had a thriving town with 260 residents, a bank, general stores, hotels, pharmacy, a barber shop. Benjamin Singleton was a black real estate entrepreneur who in 1879 encouraged more than 6,000 African Americans to move from Texas, Louisiana, and Mississippi to Kansas. And they were called the Exodusters because they had in mind Exodus, that favorite chapter from the Bible, from the Old Testament, moving westward and hoping to establish freedom. More than 60 all-black towns were created in the West between 1865 and 1920, and I would like to draw your attention to the fact that there was one such in New Mexico. The town of Blackton was set up basically where Dexter, New Mexico is today, just slightly south of Roswell. It was a joint effort on the part of African American families who moved there, bought some land, established some farms. They had a post office, a school, a general store. Unfortunately, by the end of the 19-teens, due to drought and the fact that they were in a very isolated region, Blackton failed and disbanded, and some of the people from Blackton moved down to Vado, but there was this experiment in New Mexico in the early years of the 20th century to establish an all-black town. Let me show you the impact of this westward movement. You can see the population there, mostly concentrated in 1860 in the southern states, and by 1890 appreciable number of people have moved to the Pacific Northwest, to Kansas in particular. You can see there's between 10,000 and 50,000 African Americans living in Kansas. There are some living in New Mexico, and in addition there has been some movement straight north to places like Illinois and Iowa and Indiana and Ohio. We're going to see much more migration as part of what I will talk about as a Great Migration in a subsequent lecture. And here we'll end on this nice picture of African American homesteaders. It was very common for people to have their picture made outside of their houses due to the absence of flash photography in the 19th century, especially in rural areas, and people put on their finest clothes. So here they are in their Sunday best, standing outside their very neat little house. So the West was one of the places where African Americans did have more opportunity. And again, just to summarize, probably the high point of accomplishment for African Americans was in the realm of church establishment and literacy over time. And really the low point was in terms of being able to get an economic footing. And that, we're going to see, has an impact that really lasts up until quite late in our nation's history, that there are really bad social and economic inequalities that stemmed from the failure of Reconstruction governments to do anything economic for African Americans.